Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Meanwhile, here in Washington, a lot of attention is fixed on what's taking place in the Senate today, or more specifically, the Dirksen Senate Office Building, where the Senate Armed Services Committee is currently, and still underway, holding the confirmation hearing for the Defense Secretary-designate Pete Hegseth, who, of course, has been tapped by President-elect Donald Trump to lead the Pentagon, an organization with more than 3 million people reporting up and through it. And it's been a little contentious at times. Perhaps no surprise, he's faced very difficult questions from Democrats in regard to a number of issues, but he also began the hearing by pleading his own case. Here's part of his opening statement.
Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials, whether they are retired generals, academics, or defense contractor executives. And where has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring our warriors never enter a fair fight. We let them win, and we bring them home. Like many of my generation, I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled a trigger downrange, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevacs, dodged IEDs, pulled out dead bodies, and knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now.
Pete Hegseth speaking before the Senate Armed Services Committee in prepared remarks. That's how it started. Not only trying to make the case for his nomination and confirmation, of course, but also trying to get ahead of some of the more difficult questions that he might be asked, and he's been asked all of them. And we've got more to go here. Joining us, a voice of experience who spent a lot of time with this committee and in rooms like these, retired Marine Corps Major General Arnold Punaro, former staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the author of If Confirmed, an insider's view of the Senate confirmation process. What a perfect voice for today. General has spent some time, and we welcome you back to Bloomberg TV and radio. As I mentioned, you've been in this room before. How's he doing?
Well, I think he's doing extremely well. I was very impressed with his opening statement. As you mentioned, I've been involved in the confirmation process for over 12 Secretaries of Defense, going all the way back to the Ford administration, both when I was on the committee, the staff director of the committee, and then helping various nominees since leaving government on a pro bono basis. And so most of our Secretaries of Defense face tough questionings, but he certainly had a very strong opening statement. I've reviewed all of his advanced policy questions. I've listened very carefully to the hearing, and he's doing exceedingly well, in my judgment.
Well, and for many of the questions he is facing, at least the ones posed by Democrats, he's kind of doing so for the first time, as multiple Democratic senators have pointed out, sir, that Hegseth declined to meet with them in advance of this hearing, even though he was taking meetings with essentially all of the Republicans on this committee. Do you think that that was a mistake, or was it unnecessary in this case when he wasn't likely to be able to rely on Democratic votes anyway?
Well, typically the tradition is that nominees, and not just for the Secretary of Defense, all our defense nominees, of which there are 65 in the Department of Defense. So he's going to have a very strong team with him if he's confirmed, and I believe he will be confirmed. And typically they try to meet with everybody, but everybody's schedules. I don't have any inside information other than what I just heard in the hearing today. I know nominees try to meet with everybody. I know for a fact that a number of the other nominees, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Army nominee, they're meeting with both sides of the aisle. So I don't know what really happened here. It's unfortunate if he didn't have a chance to meet with some of them. But on the other hand, it's not unusual that schedules don't match up.
Yeah, they do all seem to be going out of their way to say the same thing on that front. But General, we'd love for you to bring us behind the scenes a bit and into the process. We hear a lot about mock hearings and murder boards. What goes into preparing someone like Pete Hegseth for a moment like this? How much time do you spend with him? how ugly does it get when you start looking at their record and try to give them a sense of the tough questions they're going to get?
Well, I go back, and most of the sec defs that I've been involved with, going all the way back to Harold Brown in the Carter administration,
Yep.
Cap Weinberger, Don Rumsfeld, Les Aspin, all got tough questions. So there's nothing unusual about that. Number two, it does take a tremendous amount of preparation. Some of the previous secretaries of defense that didn't prepare well did not do well in their confirmation hearing. And frankly, they suffered from that when they became, even though they got confirmed, they did not have a good impression in the confirmation hearing. So I would assume, and I can tell from just the way he's answering the questions, I can tell from all the material, supporting material that's been provided to the committee, I can tell by reading his extensive advanced policy questions, they have done a tremendous amount of preparation to get him ready for this hearing. But that's appropriate. You need to do that. As some people have said, the Defense Department is the largest, most complex organization in the world, and it's all about warfighting. And so I would think that obviously they spent a tremendous amount of time with him, getting him ready, and it shows he's doing a good job.
So you think, General, that he's doing a good job in arguing that he is in fact qualified to do this job, even though he's, as has been raised in the hearing, he hasn't managed an organization bigger than hundreds of people, let alone millions, that he actually hasn't led an organizational audit, let alone one that could number in the hundreds of billions of dollars? I mean, is your takeaway from this hearing that Pete Hegseth is firmly qualified for this position?
He's qualified in terms of the things that the Secretary of Defense is involved in, and they are in Title 10. Somebody brought up what are the requirements. There are requirements in Title 10, the U.S. code that creates the Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense. And he brought out the three things that I think are most important. He's focused on improving deterrence, because those of us that have been in combat like him, like myself and others, I've been wounded in combat and been to more than one war. You want to deter wars. You don't want to have to engage in wars, and you want to focus on war fighting and lethality. That's the role of the Secretary of Defense. He's going to have, there's 65 confirmed people. They've already named a very strong team to be in there with him. John Phelan to be Secretary of the Navy, Dan Driscoll to be Secretary of the Army, Bridge Colby, a real expert on policy, Mike Duffy, a very tremendous expert in the acquisition area, and the Deputy Feinberg, a very, very successful businessman, and the number two person is the Chief Operating Officer. So the notion that somehow the Secretary of Defense has got to run the Pentagon all by themselves, and plus you've got the service chiefs, you got the joint chiefs, you got the warfighting combatant commanders. So in my judgment, it takes that kind of a team. And the names that I've seen so far, because I know most of them and have worked with them over the years, very experienced. It's going to be a very strong team.
General, we all remember John Tower in 1989. I don't know if you have any personal anecdotes from that experience or any firsthand stories, but can you speak to our audience about how rare it would be for a nominee like this to go down in a vote in committee or on the floor?
Well, in history, the only one that has not been approved was John Tower, and that was a very sad day. He was a great chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The full expectation was that he would be confirmed, but there were issues that came up during the confirmation process, particularly as it relates to the FBI report, that it ended up him not being approved. But the committee and the Congress turned around in the Senate very quickly and put Dick Cheney in very quickly after John Tower's nomination was not approved. And so I think, frankly, the Senate deserves to give Pete Hegseth an up or down vote on day one. He's the only other civilian in the warfighting chain of command, from the commander-in-chief to the combatant commands. We need a Secretary of Defense on there on day one, and he should get an up or down vote, which has been the precedent for Secretaries of Defense. And people that want to vote for him can vote for him. People that want to vote against him, vote against him. And, a majority vote rules. And if he gets a majority vote, then he will be eligible to be sworn in and appointed day one. But he deserves an up or down vote on January 20th. That's been the plan and the precedent going all the way back to Democrat and Republican presidents, that on a new president that has a new Secretary of Defense gets an up or down vote on day one. And I hope that will be the case.
Well, and assuming he is confirmed ultimately to lead this position, talk, if you will, General, about what exactly he's going to inherit. We've heard in this hearing a lot of kind of bureaucratical challenges, if you will, about the acquisition process, about an audit for the DOD. But then there's also the very real challenges in multiple theaters around the world where there are live conflicts or the threat of conflicts. How is he going to be able to navigate both those internal and external questions?
Look, he's inheriting the same challenges that the last 2 or 3 presidents have had. We live in a world that's more dangerous and unstable than the peak of the Cold War. We don't have the right strategy for dealing with the threats that we face from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and global terrorism. We need to get back to basically being able to deter, and if deterrence fails, to fight and win 2 major theater wars on a near simultaneous basis. We're not getting the bang for the buck we should for the dollars we spend in the Pentagon. In constant dollars, we're spending more than the peak of the Reagan buildup, and the force is 50% smaller. One of the things he brought out today is we need to get people, into the combat arms, and we have over 300,000 active duty military serving in inherently non-governmental jobs. They're serving in the rear with the gear. The overhead in the Pentagon is massive. The requirements process needs performed. The acquisition process needs performed. We spend over $420 billion a year in the Pentagon on goods and services, supplies and equipment, and about the only thing you can say about that output is spend more, take longer, get less. And these problems are well known. He's with his team, going to have to tackle every single one of these. If you want to improve deterrence is really important. You need to have the military capability. It has to be credible, and your adversaries have to believe that you're going to use it. So he's going to inherit some significant challenges in all of these areas.
We're spending some time on Bloomberg TV and radio with retired Marine Corps General Arnold Punaro, who literally wrote the book on Senate confirmations. General, I want to ask you about some criticism that we've heard from Democratic members of the committee about the FBI background check into Pete Hegseth. There are multiple reports here that the FBI did not interview Hegseth's ex-wives or the woman who actually accused him of sexual assault in 2017. How unusual is that? Would that have been riding on a request from committee leadership to look into that and interview those women? Or is this a problem for the FBI to have not been as comprehensive as it should be?
First of all, I want to applaud the new leadership in the Senate, the leader Thune and others that said, look, we're going to require the same kind of FBI full-field investigations for the Trump nominees that has been required in every single previous president, Democrat and Republican. And so that request doesn't come from the committees. It doesn't come from the Senate. It comes from the White House counsel's office. In this case, the transition counsel, because their White House counsel for Trump has not been set up till January 20th. And so they had the FBI go out and do what's called a full field investigation of potential nominees. And then that material is provided to the chairman and ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And it's at the chairman's discretion, as it was when my boss was chairman for 8 years, as to who else might get access to that. One of the things you have to understand, it's not like an inspector general report. It's not like a Article 32 in the military where there's an investigation, their findings and their recommendations, and they come to a conclusion and they say, well, this person is right and this person is wrong. It's just raw investigatory files, and they can be very misleading. And so the FBI reports have to be treated with great deference in terms of what they can be used for. One of the things that I felt, and people know, that was very unfair in the power thing, is there were a lot of things that got leaked out of the FBI report that weren't corroborated, and it was very damaging. And so I think the approach that Chairman Wicker is taking in terms of restricting the FBI report is appropriate. In terms of what's in it, none of us are ever going to know because it's not going to be made available publicly. And certainly you have to rely on the investigatory skills of the FBI that they did a thorough investigation. And so typically what happens is if the counsel believes there's disqualifying information in an FBI full field investigation, they'll notify the president, and the president will have to decide whether he still wants to go forward or not. The fact that the report was provided to the chairman and ranking member, the fact that things are going forward, I don't have firsthand knowledge. I certainly don't have access to it. I don't have any leaked information. My working assumption would be there's nothing in that report that's disqualifying because the proceedings are going forward.
All right, General, thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power today. That's retired Marine Corps General Arnold Punaro, who, as Joe mentioned, is also the author of If Confirmed, an insider's view of the Senate confirmation process.